What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about the 2023-24 season, how it ended in game week 38, what my final overall rank was, how the season went overall week to week, plus some players that were great for me, players that weren't so good as well, and some thoughts ahead of next season. I know I covered some of this stuff in the stream on Sunday, but it was a long day on Sunday, lots of streams. It was a reaction as well, so I didn't really have a huge amount of time to think about it. So this might be a little bit more clear and concise, although I'll tell you now, when I'm going through the different game weeks, it is a bit rambly. So if you don't want to listen to it, absolutely fine. You can come back for next season. If you do, stay tuned. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and rate 5 stars if you're still listening on podcast. Otherwise, I was going to say I'll see you next time. I forgot I'm doing the intro. Let's get into it. So let's start with how the season ended in game week 38. So I scored 66 points, which unfortunately was not enough for a green arrow. I actually got a small red arrow instead and went from about 41,000 to my final overall rank, which was 44,067th in the world, which I think is pretty good overall. If you'd offered me that at the start of the season, I probably would have taken it. I am a little bit disappointed with it, but that's primarily because it's not my highest overall rank of the season. I've been higher at earlier stages, and I think you always want to finish strong, and it's ideal with FPL if game week 38 is your best rank of the season. That wasn't the case with me, but after a few days thought, obviously the season finished on Sunday, I think I've got to be pretty happy with it. If I'm disappointed with a top 50k finish, I think overall the history must be pretty good, right? So I think it's a good overall rank. Obviously, some people have said to me, you should be doing better. You create content, you take it seriously. But ultimately, the competition is getting tougher. And some managers are still doing incredibly well. I think Ben Cradden's got like 4 top 10k finishes in a row. FPL Harry came very close to getting another top 5k. So it can be done, but it is difficult to maintain that over multiple seasons. So this is my worst finish in the last 4. And I think that if that's the case, top 50k, that's probably more than fine overall. If you offered me top 50k now for next season, would I take it? Probably. I'd like to finish higher, of course, but I know how tough it is to kind of maintain that. In terms of the moves that I made in game week 38, I sold Isak and Gordon for Chris Wood and Mo Salah. Now, there was some rumours going around ahead of the deadline that Gordon wasn't in the squad and Isak was benched. I did say multiple times on the deadline stream, I'm not 100% sure if that is legit, but it didn't really matter for my moves because if you've been watching the videos all week, I was either going to sell Isak or bench him. And I was always selling Gordon either way. The 2 main moves that I was considering were Salah and a cheap forward or Eze and Trent. And unfortunately, I went for the wrong move because whichever cheap forward I brought in, I was always going to bench them. So Chris Wood was not going to play either way. Salah only got 6 points. And the defender I would have benched if I got Trent in was Saliba. I always wanted to play Pedro Porro. I said that multiple times. So Salah and Saliba got 8 points. Eze got 18 on his own. And Trent also got a 6-pointer. So Eze and Trent got 24. Salah and Saliba got 8. And again, that's one of those close calls. I think that's a pretty close call, right? I don't think you can sit there and say that Eze and Trent was absolutely the way to go. The only reason not the only reason, right? But a reason to be disappointed. I'm not even, disappointed is the wrong word, right? But one of the, I can't get my words out. This is the problem with the end of the season now. I've forgotten how to make videos. I said like Eze and Trent was 2 differentials, whereas Salah was only 1. And maybe given it was the final week, I should have gone for it. But I think to sit here and say that it was a massive mistake is just not the case, right? Arsenal defence has been so good. Salah on his day could have done much better. If you actually look at the underlying stats from Salah against Wolves, and it's so frustrating because Wolves were down to 10 men for so much of that game. Salah played the full match. He didn't get subbed. 1.3 expected goals, 0.13 expected assists, and walks away with just 1 assist. It could have been more on the day. He did have a couple of chances. It is what it is. It's a 1-game week shootout. You're not always going to get it right. That's the way I went. Do I wish I went Eze and Trent? Of course, because I like points, but it didn't happen. And then with my bench, a lot of people mentioned that on the stream on Sunday, like how frustrating it must be, to have Chris Wood with 13 points first bench and Diogo Dalot 15 points second bench. But honestly, I never really considered playing them. Like Dalot was never getting played, not ahead of double Arsenal defence and Pedro Porro against Sheffield United, who himself got a 14-pointer. Had one of them got injured, I probably wouldn't have taken a hit. I would have played Dalot, but he was never under consideration for the 11. I just don't think you can be too frustrated at that. Obviously, you don't want to bench massive amount of points like that, but it is what it is, right? It's not worth getting annoyed about if you never considered playing them. And it's the same with Chris Wood. I think earlier on in the week, I was considering getting Muniz and Salah instead of Wood and Salah. I'm not really sure what made me change, to be honest, on the final day. And there was a brief moment where I thought maybe to take a bit of extra risk, I bench one of my attackers. But apart from Nicholas Jackson and Haaland, they all returned. And Haaland, obviously, I was never going to bench instead of Chris Wood. So, again, I was never really playing him. So, yes, I've got 28 points from 2 players on my bench. But I'm not really too annoyed about it, right? There's other stuff that's been more frustrating throughout this season. So Salah 6 points, Brennan Johnson 6 points, Son 7, Foden 15, Palmer 6. All my midfielders returned, but Jackson up front blanked, and so did Haaland captain. I'd love to have Eze in there. It just wasn't to be this week. And then Arsenal defence, of course, Gabriel went off before the 60th minute. He and Saliba got 3 points between them, but they've been so good to me. I can't be annoyed about that either. And then in goal, it was Petrovic. I did kind of semi-consider doing Edison to Ortega. I didn't want to do that in the end. I thought a goalkeeper move final day just didn't feel exciting enough, to be honest. And obviously Man City conceded, which was really nice because Vardio and Ortega blank. But either way, it was not enough for a green arrow. I think if this was just a random game week throughout the season, like game week 23 or something, I'd probably be okay with it, right? 66 points, small red arrow, some pretty good decisions, I would say. But obviously, you needed a bit more in game week 38. So 44k is the overall rank. Like I said, it's the worst of the last 4. I've got them on screen here. Last season was 35,711. Before that, it was top 10k just about. The season before that was nearly top 1k. So again, I think that's a pretty good record. There's definitely better managers out there, absolutely. But I'm pretty happy with how I play generally. I enjoy playing the game still. I'm not frustrated with it or anything like that. And I think the record is all right still. I mean, I am moving from most of my finishes are in the top 25k to now they're mostly in the top 50k, right? So there is a bit of an expanding of the bracket there to make it sound a little bit better. But honestly, 20k, 10k, 15k, 8k, 5k, and then 4 top 50s in a row. I think it's fine. So I'm pretty happy overall with how the season went. And obviously I'm a content creator as well, right, on YouTube. And I feel like, well, hopefully anyway, people are still watching. The content was decent as well. And so overall, I think I'm pretty happy. I'm looking forward to next season. But let's talk a little bit more about how this season went. So I'm not going to go into detail about every single game week, but I do think it's interesting to look at how the overall ranks went up and down over the course of the season, where chips were played and stuff like that. So game week 1, if we have a quick look at the team that I went with, I think it was pretty solid overall. Obviously, I had Saliba. That was a kind of late change for Gabriel, which I won't go into detail too much. I think we spoke about that enough at the start of the season. Hopefully, there's nothing like that for game week 1 next year. I had Pickford in goal, who for weeks was kind of laughed at as an option, despite Everton's underlying stats being pretty good and the fixtures being good. And then, obviously, I got 1 return out of him in game week 9, I think it was, against... No, not game week 9, game week 8, sorry, against Bournemouth. And then I got rid of him on wildcard and he went and absolutely smashed it. So I actually think Pickford was a pretty good pick. Saliba definitely was. SGPian obviously was in at the start because Brighton's fixtures were so good. They had Luton at home, Wolves away, Newcastle at home to start the season, plus Bournemouth at home in game week 6. And we know how attacking he can be. He didn't really have the season we would have hoped, but I still think he was an okay pick. And I also had Chilwell. I'm a sucker for a Chelsea fullback or wingback in Chilwell or Reece James. And I'm sure when they're available next year, because obviously James is going to be suspended at the start of the season, if they're fit, I'll probably go back there again. I had double Arsenal attack, which was fine for a lot of the season. I had Saka and Martinelli, but in the end, it was the double defence that was the key difference maker, because clean sheets were quite hard to come by in general, and they got obviously the most. And there was plenty of attackers to choose from, so you didn't necessarily need double Arsenal attack. In Burmo as well, was really good with Tony out on penalties. And Rashford and Fernandes was probably the big mistake, having double Man United midfielders. And look, people will still bang on about bias and stuff like that, despite me barely owning a Man United player from kind of game week 10 onwards. And look, that was a mistake. I think a lot of people have asked me, like, what lessons have I learned? And on the stream, I said I hadn't learned any, and maybe that didn't come across too well, but I still kind of stand by that, right? You're just looking to pick good players with good stats, with good fixtures, and then you're kind of hoping for the best. And obviously, throughout the season, stuff will, come up. Certain players will go into form. There might be a formation shift or something like that. But that's stuff you pick up throughout the season. There's nothing really from this year which makes me think I've got to play differently next year. I'm not gonna pick Marcus Rashford, fine, but if the circumstances are right, I will consider it. That's the problem for me with lessons learned. A lot of what people say is stuff like, I'm not going to pick this player again, super frustrating. But if the timing is right and they're getting the minutes and they're looking good, the stats are good, they've got the fixtures, I will consider Marcus Rashford next year, especially if his price comes down. I'll consider Edison. I'll consider Darwin Nunez. They might not be in my Game Week 1 squad, but if the circumstances are right, I will not write any player off, even Luka Dean, right? If he gets enough minutes and he's looking good, he'd still be a consideration, despite him being kind of portrayed as this troll in the FPL community. So Fernandes and Rashford was definitely a mistake. But looking back, would I go back and change it? Probably not. And I don't think it's stubbornness. It's just you're not always going to get the players at the right time. Look at Jordan Pickford. Again, laughed at for multiple weeks at the start of the season. Ended up being the top scoring goalkeeper, I think. Let me just double check that. Yeah, 153 points. He actually outscored Gabriel at Arsenal. So it is what it is. I also had Watkins and Haaland. I actually think Watkins was a really good pick because he wasn't super high owned at the start of the season. We knew he was going to start. I paid that, I think he was 8 million to start. And I paid that little bit extra to have him over. I can't even remember who other people went for, but I just felt like, from what I remember, Watkins wasn't like 80% owned or anything like that. But I sold him pretty quick in Game Week 3 for Nicholas Jackson with good fixtures, and it didn't go to plan. And again, you look back at that and you say, well, that was a massive mistake. But then people were still not sure about Jackson come Game Week 35. And he absolutely smashed it that weekend in Game Week 36. So that's why I'm saying there's no massive lessons for me. I'm just going to pick who's got good stats with good fixtures and kind of go from there, really. So that was my Game Week 1 team. I've already spoken a lot about other stuff I was going to cover in this video. I did go up to 224k by Game Week 3, and I did joke around at that point I was going to go and win FPL, which obviously didn't happen. But realistically, I don't worry about my overall rank until we get kind of past Game Week 10, because there's lots of people playing. There's a huge amount of activity from FPL managers because obviously it's the start of the season. Lots of chips being played and stuff like that. Ranks don't tend to even themselves out until you get a little bit later on. So by Game Week 8, I was 1.5 million, right? Which looks pretty bad, but it didn't stay that way for that long. And I actually think, right, so Game Week 7 was the week where... Oh, sorry, let me just go back here. Otherwise I'm going to lose where I am. Game Week 7 was the week where Villa smashed Brighton 6-1. Watkins scored a hat-trick and had 2 assists. Obviously, by that point, I've sold him, so I didn't own him for that. But also, they had good fixtures to come. And I think a lot of people wildcarded in Game Week 8 who weren't originally planning to. And then they also did well in Game Week 8, whereas I fell to 1.5 million. And my team that week just didn't have... Oh, sorry, I had Matty Cash, but I didn't have Watkins or anyone like that. I stuck with Rashford and Fernandes in Burmo, etc. I had Alvarez up front with Haaland, because obviously he was playing a lot of the time. Did get my pick for clean sheet, but it was just not a good game week. But I'm actually quite happy with how I played that, because I didn't panic, because I still felt my team... My original plan was to wildcard in Game Week 10, and I felt like my team for Game Week 9 was pretty good, and that turned out to be the case. So in Game Week 8, I was 1.5 million. Game Week 9, I went up to 900k. And that was because I stuck with those players. Rashford didn't return, but Bruno Fernandes did. Mbeumo got a 14-pointer. I had the double up on Newcastle defence. Trippier and Schär, 17 points between them. Alvarez returned for me as well. Son and Maddison. I think Spurs had... Who did they have? Someone good. Yeah, Fulham at home. So I think I bought in Maddison before wildcarding. And it was a really good week. So, look, I could have panicked in Game Week 8 after falling down to 1.5 million, just wildcarded like everyone else did. And I'm sure people that wildcarded then did really well too. But I stuck to my guns and it worked out in the end. And then obviously I wildcarded in Game Week 10. And that's when I bought in Cole Palmer. I did bench him that week. Who did he have in Game Week 10? Let's have a look here. Brentford at home. Wow. Looking back now, that seems crazy to bench Palmer against Brentford at home, but at least he blanked that week. And then from wildcard 10 onwards, things started going well. So 700k, 600k, 500, 300, etc. And that kind of continued. I actually had a pretty good run of green arrows right up until game week 22, where I was 30k. And then I fell down a little bit ahead of the double game weeks. And then it was kind of only up from there. After the doubles it was game week 25 was the double for Liverpool. I went up to 25k, 23k in game week 30. That was kind of my peak. And then it went down from there. So I know I've skipped a bunch of game weeks there. Let me just go back and see when I used the chips. Yeah, triple captain in game week 25 obviously didn't pay off. I'll come on to free hit 29 in a minute. But yeah, after that wildcard in game week 10, things just kept going well. And I didn't, like if I click into any of these random game weeks, like game week 20, I never had a differential team. And I've spoken about this over multiple seasons now. The idea that you have to go massively different to climb up the ranks is just not true. Like my team in game week 20 was Watkins, Solanke, Alvarez. Remember, Haaland was injured at the time. Salah, Palmer, Saka, Son. Right? They're not differential players. And I kept getting green arrows. It didn't continue. And some people might say, well, you should have started taking risks. But that would have changed the style of play. And I just don't think that would have worked for me. I just stick to kind of what I know. Game week 25, hugely frustrating because that was a double game week for Liverpool and Man City. And obviously some of the talk is, we put too much emphasis on double game weeks and stuff like that. But then look at Zabani in game week 28. Look at what happened in game week 34. They can be big weeks. It just so happens that it didn't go right for Man City and Liverpool. And if I told you right now, Liverpool and Man City were going to have a double game week in game week 1, you'd have 6 of their players, wouldn't you? Right? Right now, you would. I don't think anyone would go in without them. And that is how I always play it, pretty much. And it doesn't always work out, but when it does, it's good. And Darwin and Jota got injured. Foden blanked. De Bruyne came in as well. Conor Bradley started twice in game week 25. Against Burnley at home, Brentford away. Against Brentford away and Luton at home. They conceded 1 goal in both games. It just wasn't to be for double game weeks for a lot of this season. But like I said, overall, pretty good. Free hit in 29. Game week 29 was so frustrating. 16 points on a free hit. I still stand by it was a perfectly fine move that didn't work out. Like Reguilon getting a red card so early obviously messed up the other 2 Brentford players I had, Tony and Flecken. Spurs getting 0 returns, Porro, Maddison and Son against Fulham. I just don't think you can. I just don't think you can say it was a week where no one got returns. And the point that I would make, right, because a lot of people say this is why I didn't use my free hit. Those same people were taking hits to make sure they could get up to 8, 9, 10, 11 players, right? So what if it was so obvious that there was going to be no attack and returns? Why were hits and stuff being taken, right? Because you expected at least some returns. I think to get 0 won't happen again next year. If there's a blank like this, which there probably won't be because of the FA Cup, and you free hit, it will not be as bad as this week was. But it was kind of a turning point for me. But I just felt like before and afterwards, I had a pretty good team, and I didn't need to save it for the double. And it's worth saying, double game week 25, I had 3 Liverpool, 3 Man City. In double game week 28, I had 1 Luton and 3 Bournemouth, Zabani, Neto, Solanke. Game week 29, for no hits, because obviously I used the free hit, I had a full set of 11 players. I can't remember when the other double game weeks were. Obviously 34, in the end, I had 11 double game week players because Haaland didn't play. And it just wasn't enough. I had Eze, but I didn't have Mateta. I didn't have Jordan Pickford and go. I didn't have Ben White. But I had 11 double game week players. I had 13 for game week 37. So overall, I covered all the doubles and blanks without too many hits whatsoever, just by using the free hit in 29. It just didn't work out. And now the lesson for a lot of people will be always free hit in a double. But I don't think that's a lesson to take away. I think you weigh up the circumstances at the time and hope that, it works out. So, yeah, game week 30 is when I peaked. Actually, after the free hit, I was up at 23,842. And I was still 25k by the time I got to game week 32. But game week 33, when I didn't have Isak or Gordon, and then game week 34 just absolutely destroyed any chances of finishing in the top 25k. And I go back and look at these few weeks. Like game week 31 was a disaster, basically. I took a -4 to bring in Salah because I wanted Darwin when I could have just got Mateta for free. And if I got Mateta, I would have kept Phil Foden and I would have played him and I would have had his hat-trick. Like, I benched and sold a Foden hat-trick. And also this week, I sold Bruno Fernandes as well. He went on and got 6 goals in 4 games. So this was a real turning point, I think, for how badly the end of the season was going to go. Instead of taking a -4 for Darwin, I should have got Mateta for free, kept Foden. That move alone might have been worth like 20 to 40 points without anything else after that. And that is just the fine margins. And I don't want to go into massive detail about free hit 29 versus 34. I'm happy to accept that overall 34 was better for, the average kind of FPL manager. But, going into game week 30, and I know I'm going through loads of teams here, going into 34 itself, this team could have had Mateta, and instead of Henderson, I might have bought Pickford, who got a double clean sheet for Everton, and that might have been enough to finish well, just those 2 player changes. So nothing to do with when I played the chips, just having slightly different players instead. And in another week, it could have, in another season, it might have fallen like that. I might have decided not to take the hit for Darwin and just to get Mateta instead. And that is the fine margins. And also, let's not forget, Haaland missed out that week when we didn't necessarily expect him to. We only found out afterwards that he was definitely out. And that Brighton game, Man City scored 4 goals and Haaland wasn't a part of it. So it could have gone so much different, right? Of course, I wish I free hit 34 because I would have had triple Crystal Palace, but didn't happen. And also with the Cunha injury, I think Mateta would have come in for sure and I would have had Pickford in goal. So just small things can change massively. Even look, right, I had double Arsenal defence, Gabriel and Saliba. Ben White goes and scores their score combined. So I think it was fine. So that's kind of the season overall. Let's look at some specific players that have been either good or frustrating. So some of my favourite players from this season, Charlie Taylor has got to have a shout out because I only played him or got him off the bench in 3 game weeks this season. Game weeks 10, 14 and 26. And if you look at those weeks, he got returns in 2 of them. Maybe this is even enough to go on the wall. But in game weeks 10, he got, let me just check here, 6 points against Bournemouth because he scored. When was the other week? Let me just check it. Game week 14, he got the 10-pointer against Sheffield United. And then game week 26, I think was it a blank game week maybe or something like that? And we didn't know if he was going to, he was just back from injury, right? And I played him against Crystal Palace away. Now, we only got a 1-pointer, but still, it was nice to have him available. So 3 weeks, and he gets a 6 and 10-pointer in 2 of them. Absolute legend. Cole Palmer at 4.9 million, one of the best value players I've ever bought in FPL. The top scoring player this season. He didn't even start until, let me just double check when it was, game week, where is it? Game week 7. Right, absolutely ridiculous season. The only, not even disappointment, but the only slight thing that could have gone better, I think if he'd blanked a couple of times here or there over the next few weeks after I owned him, less people would have picked him up so quickly because he wasn't a differential for very long. But getting him at 4.9 million on game week 10 wildcard just meant that I had a bit more money to spend for the rest of the season. I never dropped him at all outside of obviously free hits and stuff like that. Gabriel and Saliba double up for Arsenal from game weeks 12 all the way till 38 have been brilliant. Right, we've talked a lot this season about defenders. They're not worth using transfers on. There's not enough clean sheets. Those 2 players got so many returns, and their price was great as well. I didn't wildcard with both of them. I only had Gabriel in game week 10, but in game week 12, I rectified that, picked up Saliba, got rid of João Pedro, and then kept them ever since. Obviously, in the end, Ben White was great, but I cannot complain about having those 2 players. In terms of goals and clean sheets, it was just absolutely ridiculous for pretty much the whole season. Obviously, it wasn't every single week, but they were by far the best 2 defenders to own over the majority of this season, plus Ben White, of course. Nicholas Jackson, game weeks 35 to 38. Didn't do a huge amount in 37 and 38 itself, but even going into a double-double, because Chelsea doubled in 35 and 37, people were still unsure about him. And that is why I spoke earlier about not really having too many lessons. Like, he had good fixtures or additional fixtures in this case and still had good underlying numbers, so I was willing to take the risk on him and got well rewarded for it. You know, I could have just been like, you know, he's been rubbish all season. He's so frustrating. Watkins has been on form all this time. But that's just not how I want to play. So I'm very happy with Jackson. Also, you know, I've shouted out about how frustrating Bruno Fernandes was when I owned him kind of game weeks 1 to 9. But in game week 28, bearing in mind at this point, I've already missed, I think, a Foden hat-trick at some point. Was it game week 26? Let me have a look. No, it wasn't game week 26. I can't remember anyway. But Foden's absolutely smashing it. And in game week 28, I benched him for Bruno Fernandes, which obviously everyone said was a mistake at the time. And he went and got an 11-pointer. It was a penalty, and he did give the second penalty to Rashford. But still, 11 points was a nice little win on Fernandes in a season where there wasn't a huge amount. And then in Burmo early season, when he was obviously absolutely nailed, fully fit, and on penalties, was fantastic as well. Let's look at the players that were a bit more, let's just say, not favourites. So I've called these players absolute killers, just ones that didn't go well for me, that were frustrating at times. The first player is Phil Foden, who, to be fair, I've actually owned for quite a large amount of this season. Obviously, he's done really well, one of the top scoring players overall. But I happened to bench him for a hat-trick, and I sold him just before a hat-trick as well. Obviously not his fault, completely mine, but massively frustrating. So the first hat-trick was, let me see here, game week 23, Brentford away. He scored 20 points. Let me just check who I actually played instead that week. It's probably someone terrible. So I played Solanke. Fair enough. Nailed non-penalties. Not that bad a call. Watkins got 18 points. Haaland I was never going to bench. Richarlison 15. Saka 9. Palmer 8. And Gordon 4 points. Was it a terrible call to bench Foden? I mean, looking back on it, it was. But at the time, it didn't feel like that. So that was one of them. And then the other one was in game week. Let me just check here. Game week, 31, when I sold him as part of my move to get Salah. So that was an absolute killer. But fair play, Foden has been absolutely fantastic. I hope he carries that into the Euros for sure. Ederson over Vardiol ended up being really bad. But I actually stand by the Ederson pick. I think it's fair to say, you know, the Vardiol was the better choice for the final few weeks. But even going into Wildcard 35, I don't think most people were fully set on Vardiol being the best option, right? At Man City, there was still a lot of people like me that just didn't want that headache of a Man City defender. And his ownership wasn't that high in 35 itself when he got a 15-pointer against Forest. It was only after that he started getting transferred in really heavily. And in game week 36, he got a 6-pointer against Wolves. And then the killer was not having him for the double in 37. The 21-pointer against Wolves was absolutely ridiculous. So not many people had him for the Forest game, which wasn't a problem. It was the 21-pointer against Fulham. But the thing is, with Ederson, right? So he didn't get a return against Wolves because Vardiol got an attacking return. But he still was the only goalkeeper to get a clean sheet in 37, right? 6-point and 7-pointer. So I had him from game week 35. I only played him 2 weeks, game week 36 and 37. So he got 2 clean sheets in 3 matches for me. So I can accept that Vardiol was the better pick, but it didn't necessarily feel like that when I wildcarded. And obviously I decided not to use my 2 free transfers to bring Vardiol in, and that was a massive mistake in hindsight. But I still don't know if it was a massive mistake without that hindsight. But either way, absolute killer. Darwin just generally, I bought him in a few times this season, never really went that well. Mateta, not buying him for game week 34, and then for him to score a hat-trick final day, which again, I never really considered him. I was always looking at Eze as my Crystal Palace attacker, but still, to not own him has killed my season at various stages. The Everton double clean sheet in game week 34 was massively frustrating. Because a few weeks before that, right, knowing that I had to set up for the double, I basically decided that in order to be able to keep Son for Forest at home in 32 and Newcastle away in 33, and bearing in mind at the time, Newcastle were defending really badly. They were conceding goals. I decided I wanted to keep Son. I've just hit my desk. Hopefully you didn't hear that. And to not waste a transfer, I knew that I had to make a goalkeeper swap in game week 33 instead, so that I could delay the move to sell Son until 34. And when I originally thought about that plan, the goalkeeper I was going to bring in was Jordan Pickford. And I don't really know why, but I switched to Henderson. Henderson got a 5-pointer, and Pickford in game week 34 got 18. Clean sheet against Forest, which was part of the reason I wanted him, because I thought there was a good chance of a clean sheet that game. But I thought there's no chance to get a clean sheet against Liverpool. They do. They played really well as well that game. He gets a 10-pointer. That was an absolute killer. The change of mind. And again, that wasn't a free hit thing. I just changed my mind on which goalkeeper to bring in. And then Bruno, like Foden, was also sold in game week 31. He went and got 6 goals in 4 game weeks. So, yeah, absolute killers. Let's look at next season. So looking ahead to next season, one takeaway from this season is definitely that goals have gone up. I think this is the most goals ever scored in a Premier League season. So perhaps there needs to be less emphasis on defence when we're picking our FPL teams. It might be that the goals have gone up this season, that's just a one-off, and it's going to return to kind of a more normal level next year. But I suspect that is in part to the added time, at the end of each half, right? It has gone up overall. So I suspect that the goals will continue to be a little bit higher than they have been previous seasons. Look, you could use that as a lesson for next year to not worry about defence so much, but I don't know if that's the right takeaway from this season. Like, you still have to pick 5 defenders, and you still have to play at least 3 every single week, so you should still think about them. And if your attack looks good, you can still use transfers on them. Like, in terms of our decisions about defenders, nothing really changes. We want players with potential attack and returns who are in good defences with good fixtures. Now, if you're in a situation where you can either change a defender or an attacker, and the amount of goals we're seeing per game on average continues to go up, then yeah, maybe you make the attacking transfer instead. But I feel like most people would have done that anyway in previous seasons. So maybe there is something to think about next year, but I don't think it massively changes the way we play. I would expect some prices to go up. So Arsenal defenders have got to be more expensive next year. And therefore, maybe we do go for slightly worse defenders overall to make sure we can get the attack we want. But again, that feels like a conversation I've had a lot of times in, seasons when I first started playing. So I don't know if there's going to be a massive change there. I think prices could do with going up across the board. Do I think they will do that? Probably not, because I think the way they have it right now is people can just come in and buy players from the top teams, and that probably keeps them a little bit more engaged. Whereas when I first started playing a long time ago now, I think this is my 14th season I've played, you would have to think about the teams coming up from the Championship for some of their cheap defenders to be able to fund the rest of your team. You don't have to do that anymore. I mean, was that more fun? I don't know. Maybe there is some rose-tinted glasses there because that's when I started playing. But I do think if people want to see less of a template or more interesting decisions to be made, the prices do need to go up. And I heard Planet FPL talking about this. James mentioned that obviously Kane, left Spurs, and that left a massive gap in terms of premium players this year. And had he stayed, maybe things would have been different. But you can't have players like Saka at 8.5 million. He's too cheap. And I think he needs to go up. And maybe that's one of the reasons FPL should launch the game a little bit later to see what kind of transfers are made. Because if Salah stays, okay, you've got a premium we know can deliver. Yes, okay, it was his worst season in a Liverpool shirt in terms of FPL points last year. He still put up over 200, right? Again, which he's done every single season. So if he stays, maybe some of the other prices can be a little bit lower. But I think it could, even if he stays, I think it could be the end of 2 premiums. I think a lot of people might just go for Haaland plus a few others. And if you don't start putting Saka at kind of 9.5, 10 million, and Cole Palmer up near that price as well, Son, etc., it's probably going to be too easy to make a team. We shouldn't, if we want the game to be a bit more competitive, we probably shouldn't be able to have a team of Man City, Arsenal, primarily Liverpool players to start off. But again, is it more fun to not have that? I don't know. Maybe it's not. And I do think that keeps people more engaged. But when I say prices should go up, I don't necessarily just mean the likes of Saka and Palmer, etc. Like, Arsenal defenders should be 6 million minimum, really. Backup players as well in certain positions should be more expensive. Now, some people will always argue, why should Liverpool's backup goalkeeper be a similar price to Alisson? He's not going to play. It's not really the way that I would look at it. I would look at it as, if Alisson gets injured and Kelleher is 4 million, that's too cheap, right? For a Liverpool goalkeeper, he should be more expensive. Should they be the same price? Probably not. Because when Alisson misses out, Liverpool are weaker by having Kelleher. He's a good goalkeeper, but he's not Alisson's level. But if Alisson's 5.5, Kelleher shouldn't be 4. He should probably be 5 million, right? So 0.5 million difference is probably fair. And look, I don't blame FPL for the price of Cole Palmer. I don't think many of us expected him to do what he's done. But maybe even backup players in attack for Chelsea, Man City, Spurs, etc. should be that bit higher, because if they do well enough to get in the team, they must be pretty damn good, right? Because you've got to usurp some really good players. So I think overall, like, I keep saying overall price should go up. I've said that a million times now. But even think about defenders, right? It shouldn't be a case that the best defender from Ipswich is 4.5 and Crystal Palace defenders are also 4.5. You don't have to put them up to 7. You just put them up to 5 million. So then there's at least a conversation to be had about the newly promoted sides. But for the last few seasons, it hasn't really mattered who's in those teams, because you can just ignore them because there's no need. So I think prices could do with going up, but will they do it? Probably not. Do I think it would definitely make it more fun? Not necessarily, right? It might not make it a better game. We'd have to wait and see if and when they do it. I still think underlying data and fixtures is still king. If a player's got good stats, good fixtures coming up, that's it for me, even if they haven't performed well. I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's how I've played the last few seasons. It's gone well. I don't see the point in changing that. I still believe if you could give me data or watching games, I would take data. Like if my sole purpose was to do well in FPL, I would take the data over watching the games. Obviously, I want to watch football because it's fun and entertaining. I've done that all my life. But if you're just talking doing well at FPL, the data probably wins out every time. Not always going to be the case, but over a long span, it probably will. Taking risks is absolutely fine. I mean, you could consider my Fernandes over Foden move in game week 28 a bit of a risk, but you definitely don't need to go out of your way to be different. That is a myth from a long time ago. And people always say you've got to be different, you've got to take lots of risks. You don't to do well, right? And again, that might sound boring. I appreciate people aren't happy that they want to go for that, completely random pick that goes and gets them a hat trick or a brace when no one else owns them. I get it, right? That is fun when it happens. But these days, everyone's so clued in, and it's been proven time and time again, you don't need to do that. So that's kind of why I've said a million times now, there's not really a huge amount of lessons for me. I'm still just going to pick good players with good fixtures and then hope it goes well. I mean, what more can you do? You have no control over what that player is going to do when they're on the pitch. There is going to be less double and blank game weeks next year, which may make things more interesting. I think possibly it's going to make it less interesting, but I'm open-minded. I'm willing to see. And the reason for that is there's just FA Cup changes. So I think, and I could be wrong, that later stages of the FA Cup are being given their own weekend, so they don't clash with Premier League games. So therefore, the Premier League games don't need to be called off. So there's less blank game weeks. And if there's no postponements, there's going to be less doubles, because obviously those games need to be put somewhere else. There still will be blank and double game weeks because of stuff like the Carabao Cup final, etc. And obviously external events can happen as well. But going into next season, there will be less, which some people like because they don't like being pushed into double game week players. I think overall it's going to be worse, but I'm open-minded. I'm willing to take a season or two to see how it goes. I don't think chip use will change massively, though. If there's still going to be double game weeks, we're probably still going to want to use triple captain there, bench boost, etc. But maybe bench boost in particular, that won't be the case. Because I've never bench boosted with a full set of double game week players anyway. So maybe that will change a little bit. Triple captain I don't think will. And free hit, I guess a lot of people will want to use it in a double now. I still think it'll probably be quite useful in a blank, and wildcard kind of as and when. So if there's any lessons you've learned, you watch it on YouTube, leave me a comment below. I'm not like, I feel like it sounds quite arrogant when I say I haven't really learned anything. Like, there's probably better ways to play the game, but I'm quite happy with how I go about it, and it works pretty well. And I don't like lessons where it's, well, just don't buy this player because they didn't score many points, because that can happen at any time, right? I mean, look at Ollie Watkins. He was so good for so much of the season. Last 4 game weeks didn't own him. Never really a massive problem. So leave me a comment below. If you've enjoyed that, give it a like, hit that subscribe button. If you're still listening on podcast, make sure to rate 5 stars as well. Plans, maybe another FPL video soon about the winner, but I'm not sure I'm going to have time to do that. Lots of people still asking about Euro 2024 fantasy. I am doing it, as I've confirmed numerous times now, but I don't see a massive rush to get into it. So I'll probably wait until the start of June to start talking about it and do a few videos there. I've got something cool coming up for that as well, which I will have to tell you about closer to the time. Otherwise, that's probably it for FPL. When will the game come out? I don't know. Last year and the year before, it released on July 5th. July 5th is the quarterfinals for the Euros, and it's a Friday. So I think we might get a slightly later launch this year, maybe the 8th or 9th of July. But I'm pretty confident FPL will come out before the Euros finish, because it did last time out. So yeah, maybe 8th or 9th of July, something like that. We'll be talking about FPL again. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me all season. I may be back with an FPL video soon. I may not be. Otherwise, I'll see you for Euro Fantasy if you're interested in that. Otherwise, July, we'll see each other again. We'll do all this over again, and hopefully we'll get a little bit luckier than this year.